Kitab at Tawheed, Chapter 20 The condemnation of the one who worships Allah at the grave of a righteous man. And how then does this amount to worship of the man? In the Sahih, Iaei Bukhari and Muslim, Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, reported. Salama mentioned to Allah's Messenger, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, that in Abyssinia she saw a church full of pictures and statues. He, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, said, when a righteous man or pious worshipper among them dies, they build a place of worship over his grave and set up all kinds of pictures and statues. They are the worst of all creatures before Allah. They combine the two evils, worshipping at the graves and making graven images and statues. Also in Al-Bukhari and Muslim it is reported that Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, narrated. When the death approached Allah's Messenger, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, he began to draw a piece of cloth, bed sheet, over his face, sometimes covering and sometimes removing because of distress. He, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, said in this state, Allah's curse be upon the Jews and the Christians for taking the graves of their prophets as places of worship. Thus he, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, warned the people about their actions. Had there not been any fear of making the prophet's grave a place of worship, his, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, grave would have been as open as the graves of his companions, may Allah be pleased with him. Muslim reported from Jundub bin Abdullah, may Allah be pleased with him, who narrated, I heard the Prophet, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, say only 5 days before his death, I am free and clear towards Allah of having any of you as my Khalil, especially close friend. Verily, Allah has taken me as his Halil just as he had taken Ibrahim, may Allah be pleased with him, as a Halil. If I would have taken anyone from my Ummah as a Khalil, I would have taken Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, as a Halil. Beware. Those who proceeded before you, used to make their prophets' graves into places of worship. Beware. Don't take any graves as places of worship. I forbid you to do so. He, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, forbade this at the end of his life. After this, forbidding of taking graves as masjid, place of worship, he cursed anyone who did any such deed within this context. Prayer at the graves is one of these deeds, even if no masjid has been built. This is the meaning of his, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, words he feared, his grave, would be taken as a masjid. The companions never built any place of worship around his grave. Any place which is intended for prayer, or where prayer is performed has indeed been taken as a masjid. Just as the Prophet, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, said, the whole earth has been made for me a masjid and it is pure and clean. Ahmad has reported with a good sanad that Ibn Masud, may Allah be pleased with him, narrated in a marfu hadith, tradition traced to the Prophet, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, himself. The most evil men are those upon whom the signs of resurrection, comes while they are still alive, and those who take graves as places of worship, masjid. This tradition was also reported by Abu Hatim in his Sahih.